In May 1889, Johnstown, Pennsylvania sat in a narrow industrial valley shaped by rivers, rail lines, steelwork, and mountain rain. Above the city, an old earth dam held back Lake Conemaugh for the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. To many residents, the dam was a distant fact rather than an immediate fear. Warnings had circulated before, and heavy rain was familiar in the Alleghenies. Danger becomes easier to dismiss when it has failed to arrive many times. On the last day of May, that habit of disbelief met a reservoir that could no longer hold. The South Fork Dam had been built for a canal system, then abandoned, repaired, altered, and turned into part of a private pleasure lake. Ordinary-looking changes weakened the safety margin. Drainage pipes were gone, parts of the crest were lower than they should have been, and screens could catch debris where water needed to escape. None of those details alone sounded like a death sentence to people downstream. Together, they turned a scenic lake into stored force. The disaster began before the rain, in years of maintenance postponed, and responsibility made comfortable by distance.
Rain fell heavily across the region until streams rose and the lake pressed against the dam. Men tried to cut spillways and relieve pressure. Messages were sent down the valley, but warnings about the dam had been heard before, and communication was imperfect. A community does not always ignore danger because it is foolish. Sometimes it ignores danger because the warning system has lost credibility, because work must continue, because evacuation is difficult, and because the threat is controlled by people far away. The flood began as both weather and a failure of trust.
When the dam gave way, Lake Conemaugh rushed into the valley with terrifying force. The water did not move like an ordinary flood spreading slowly across streets. It became a wall carrying trees, houses, rail cars, machinery, animals, mud, and broken buildings. Towns upstream from Johnstown were struck first, giving the wave more wreckage to carry. Every collision added weight and violence. Survivors described a roar that seemed to come from the mountains. By the time the wave reached Johnstown, it was not simply water. It was the valley itself being torn loose.
Johnstown had almost no time to prepare. People ran for hillsides, upper floors, roofs, and bridges. Some escaped by seconds. Others were trapped inside houses that lifted, spun, and shattered. Families were separated in the noise. Industrial materials turned deadly inside the current. The flood took churches, shops, homes, workshops, and streets that had formed the daily map of thousands of lives. Disasters often erase geography before they erase memory. After the wave, survivors could stand on familiar ground and fail to recognize where they were.
At the stone bridge, debris jammed and caught fire. A mountain of wreckage, soaked with oil and packed with timber and bodies, burned while people were trapped within or beneath it. The image became one of the darkest symbols of the flood because it combined water, fire, and helplessness in a single place. Those who had survived the first impact could still die in the debris pile. The disaster refused to remain one kind of catastrophe. It was drowning, crushing, exposure, flame, and grief joined in the same valley.
More than 2,200 people died, making the Johnstown Flood one of the deadliest disasters in American history. Bodies were found for weeks, some far from home, and some were never identified. Entire families disappeared. Orphans, widows, and injured survivors filled the aftermath. The practical work was immense. Clearing wreckage, restoring rail connections, finding clean water, burying the dead, and preventing disease. Yet every practical task carried emotional weight. A board was not only a board. It might be part of a neighbor's house, a workplace, or the last place someone was seen alive.
Relief arrived from across the country, and the disaster became a major test of the American Red Cross under Clara Barton. Donations, supplies, medical help, and volunteers moved toward Johnstown. Newspapers carried dramatic accounts, and photographs helped turn the valley into national evidence. Public sympathy was enormous, but sympathy also raised questions about responsibility. If private infrastructure could threaten thousands below it, who had the duty to inspect, repair, regulate, and warn? Charity can help survivors endure the aftermath, but charity could not answer why the dam had failed.
Legal accountability proved painfully limited. Survivors and families sought responsibility from the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, whose members included powerful industrial and financial figures. Lawsuits failed under the legal standards of the time. Many people believed moral responsibility was obvious, even when court responsibility was not. The gap between those judgments became part of the flood's legacy. Johnstown showed that a disaster can reveal broken engineering and broken accountability at the same time. It also showed how wealth can place risk downhill while keeping blame difficult to reach.
The flood belongs to the history of industrial America. The valley was connected to steel, railroads, labor, and the wealth of the Gilded Age. Above it sat a private lake for leisure. That geography gave the story lasting symbolic force. Risk flowed downhill from privilege toward workers and families. The point is not that every club member intended harm. The point is that systems can endanger people without requiring a villain at every step. Neglect, convenience, weak law, and social distance can be enough. When the dam broke, those hidden relations became visible in mud and timber.
Photographs of Johnstown after the flood remain essential evidence. They show collapsed houses, streets filled with wreckage, bridge debris, rescue workers and survivors standing inside landscapes that look bombed before aerial warfare existed. The images matter because they resist comfortable abstraction. A number like 2,209 can be repeated quickly. A photograph of a ruined block makes the number harder to rush past. The camera preserved the physical argument of the disaster. This was not bad luck alone. It was pressure stored above a community and warnings that failed to become action.
Today, the Johnstown flood still warns against treating aging dams, levees, reservoirs, and private infrastructure as background scenery. Modern engineering can be strong, but it still depends on inspection, maintenance, emergency planning, honest communication, and public authority. Water remembers gravity, even when institutions forget duty. The valley that heard the dam break teaches that disaster often begins long before the visible collapse. It begins when risk is normalized, when warnings become routine, when responsibility is diffused, and when those downstream must trust structures they do not control.
The lesson also reaches beyond dams. It asks who benefits from a structure, who lives beneath its possible failure, and who has the power to demand proof that it is safe. Johnstown was not destroyed only by water. It was destroyed by distance between decision makers and the people exposed to their decisions. That distance remains one of the oldest shapes of danger. When infrastructure is private, old, or politically inconvenient to inspect, communities downstream deserve more than reassurance. They deserve evidence, authority, maintenance, and warnings that are believed before the wall of water appears.
The valley rebuilt, but rebuilding did not erase the sounds survivors remembered. It did not return the missing or make the legal disappointment disappear. What remained was a record of photographs, testimony, engineering debate, relief work, and public anger. Those records still speak because they connect one 19th century flood to modern questions about risk. Every reservoir, bridge, rail line, chemical store, and hillside development carries a promise. Johnstown asks whether that promise is maintained when nobody is watching, and whether ordinary people are expected to learn the truth only after collapse.